This video is going to demonstrate how to upload an Excel data source, whether an individual spreadsheet or multiple spreadsheets, to a SQL Server database. And so make sure that before you attempt this on your own machine, that you check out my video on the difference between 32-bit and 64-bit for the SQL Server import and export data wizard. So I already know that 32-bit is the Excel files that I'm working with. So I am going to open the 32-bit wizard, and you'll see that the first window that comes up is providing the source of data that you want to import into SQL. So we're going to bring in a Microsoft Excel file. So I'll click Excel. I'm going to find the Excel file path, and it's this EdStats Excel file. And I'm going to browse for that. And it's in my desktop, so I'm going to double click that. And then I'm going to click Next. And then this is an important piece too, is whether your Excel, the first row contains headers or the names for the columns. Usually that's the case, but in case it's not, be sure to note that. We'll click Next. The next one is going to ask you to choose a destination, and we're looking for SQL Server here. You'll recall when we set up our ODBC connection for use in R and so forth, we relied on SQL Server Native Client 11.0, which has always, for me, been toward the bottom because it is in alphabetical order. So you'll select that, and then you'll provide the server name. Again, I would not click the drop-down menu because it takes a long time. So first you need to provide your server name. And you can get that from the login screen from your SQL Server Management Studio. So I'll wait for that to open. I'll also talk about where I received that data source here in a minute. So I'll copy and paste my server name. Go to the import wizard, put it in here, and once you do that, you should be able to click on the database, and I'll bring up kind of what the databases are in the SQL Express server. So where I'm going to place this data is in my master database. That way I can distinguish that from the AdventureWorks. So I click Master and click Next. This is the option you usually want. You can write a query and sort of get very technical on how you want the data to transfer, and sometimes you do need to do that, especially when it comes to like how SQL will interpret certain fields as a character field or a numeric field and that sort of thing. So that I think that piece is necessary in order to necessary if you want to kind of be that more specific than the wizard will allow. There are a couple different. Each one of these is actually a sheet within the Excel workbook. So there are 5 sheets in the Excel workbook. One is called Country. One is called Data. Country Series. I'm going to basically import everything except for the footnote. So you just select what sheet you want. And then this destination field is editable over here. So you can click in there and change what you want. The table name, remember this is the schema name. DBO is the default schema. So I'm going to remove the any kind of like special characters in here. I'm just going to call this Country Series. This one Data. And this one's Series. And so I believe if you were to click something like this, edit mappings, this is new to me, so yeah, you can specify the type, the max size of the field and that sort of thing, precision, scale. You'll see might have, yeah, these are being kind of imported as float data types. So this is where you would want to specify what should we read in. Like all software that reads in data, it'll essentially take preview of the file, and that might be the first 10 rows, and it bases the data type on what it finds. However, there are cases where the data type that it selects by default isn't appropriate, so this is where you would have to actually change it. For our purposes, I'm not going to worry about that. And then I'll click next here. Might take a bit. This file also it's not a small file, so it's probably part of the reason that it's taking a while. It didn't take this long when I tried before, but I only did 2 of the sheets instead of 4 of them. So it seems to be locking it up a little bit. And then you have this run immediately piece, run package. It's important to know that there are packages in SQL Server will allow you basically to save your importing steps. So say you need to specify which fields you need to import, etc. Having a package there is useful. All you need to do is run the package to import data. I have seen this used in my workplace for essentially, you can think of an Excel file that's updated every month and you need to port that into SQL. These packages will find the location, find the specific file that you need to port in, and it'll essentially run it as an automated task. So that's where packages are useful. I believe, so in SQL Server Express, you can't save it. You can't save the package. So if you were to do this, at the workplace where they probably don't have SQL Express, they probably have the full software. You would be able to save the package that creates it. So you'd have to have standard enterprise developer evaluation. So that's important to know that there are packages out there, so you might encounter them. If I click next, it essentially tells you what it's going to do. You don't really need to look at this summary. I've never looked at it, but you might want to double check if you're doing something that you want to ensure is right the first time. So you can see that it's processing. It already did the first 2 tables, country and country series, 241, 613. Looks like it did the series one too, which is a little bit more rows. This file here, the spreadsheet data, has quite a few more rows in it, and so you can see as it's working through that data, it'll continue to show up here. So I'm gonna leave this running right now and actually talk about the data itself. So I retrieved the data from Kaggle, I'm not exactly sure how they pronounce it. I haven't used it a lot, I just know there are a lot of data sources out here. I went on the front page, and this education statistics was the first data source I saw that I thought was relatively useful for manipulation in SQL. So I picked up education statistics, or I clicked on the link, and it takes you to this file, or this page, I'm sorry, and it gives you some of the files here. I downloaded the Excel so that I could show how to import it. For data when it gets larger, CSVs are more appropriate because it can hold more data without having to retain a lot of the formatting information, and therefore it should be faster to kind of import these things in. And you can see each one is saved. What are essentially sheets in the Excel file, each one is saved as a separate CSV because the CSVs can only support one spreadsheet. And so this is kind of your data. You can download it here. I believe you need to have, you need to register with them, which is essentially creating an account. And if you do that, make sure if you don't want to receive emails from them, you deselect that, because I know when I signed up, I was getting a lot of emails that I didn't really care for. But then there's kind of an overview of the data itself, which is nice. And it kind of tells you about it, where it was found. And then there are also kernels, which I'm not exactly sure. I think these are people working with the data and kind of developing stuff. This is kind of like a a community for working with data together. And they do have competitions too on this site. It looks like there's a discussion, excuse me, a discussion board, and then also, I'm not exactly sure, this is probably the activity on this specific page. So that's a little bit about Kaggle. I downloaded the data. I thought it was somewhat interesting, and we do have some applied econ students in the class, so this kind of tangentially related to economics, education, statistics. Usually has something to do with the economic output of a country. So if I look, and it's similar to economic data in general, the data source. So if I open the file, you can take a look at the kind of stuff it contains. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. There's this country code, which is a specific country. You can see where they specify the, for some reason, country name is actually more of like a general location. So this would be, somewhere in the Middle East. ARB has its own country code, which would be on the country page. If we go to ARB, that's the aggregate. Okay, so that's the aggregate for the Arab world. I'm not exactly sure. Oh, it tells you what it is. Members of the League of Arab States. There's also the individual countries, which I didn't realize. I thought that was a little bit of a misnomer. Yeah, so it already has kind of your countries and the country codes here. And then it has these different series that they're measuring. This is probably primary education, lower secondary. These are enrollment rates. You can see that some of the fields are definitely null, and in fact some of them aren't populated at all. And that will change, depending on the data availability for a country. Also what the country will allow to, wants to report, and some that are more state controlled. If you look at the USA, I would expect to see more data here. Here's some. It looks like only certain pieces are populated. I wouldn't be surprised if certain things that they're trying to measure aren't populated at all. And I'm not 100% sure why they wouldn't be populated. This looks like it's measured every maybe 10 years, which would be a census deal. Anyway, so that's kind of the structure of the data itself. Let's check back with our query. It looks like I got an error, which is always fun. Well, I might have to look into that afterwards. However, there still should be data within the SQL Server, so we'll exit here. I'll connect, and within the master, so under system databases, there's a master database, and we should have some tables here. This was the one that failed while I was importing, so if I select the top 1,000 rows, it should return some of the stuff that it managed to import. Which I'm not exactly sure. We can check how many it brought in. Count star. So there were 495,000 records read. I'm not exactly sure how many were in that data source, but I can follow up with that in a separate. But this essentially brings in all the data. And essentially what you saw in Excel is brought specifically into SQL Server. I will note that when you run a query, select top 1,000 rows, order is never guaranteed. So that's why you see the country code LMC first, and then you might see AFG, which you would, basically everything we saw in the Excel file was alphabetical order. If you specify an order by clause here, it will do that, or it will place them in alphabetical order and return the first 1,000. Here we're working with bigger data, so even adding something like that, you saw how long it took to return just the top 1,000 rows, and that's why when you use select star with a table of this size, you can start to really hang things up. So if I just did select star, we can see that this query, you can see it starts to populate things. However, it's still executing down here, and it hasn't finished executing, and probably will take a little bit unless it proves me a fool. That's because there are so many rows. So in an instance like this where you're working with big data and the server is hung up querying, you can always press the stop button here. It didn't take too long. It's 23 seconds to count 495,000 records. However, count star is much faster. That's why it's always preferable. And you can see it immediately returned the result there. So that this kind of video demonstrated how to bring in data and then kind of how to look at it a little bit here in SQL Server. So with that, I'll let you go.